So I watched Tonya a few days ago, and it was an excellent film. It was really funny and interesting, and I mean, I remember I was young when it happened, but I remember like hearing about it on the news. But you never really, especially like as a child, like you would never really think about like the people involved. You know what I mean? You just think, oh, there's some sort of like scandal on the ice rink, and that's it. And so it was a very interesting story, and the way the film was done in the mockumentary style made it very watchable. But I think if it was not done in that style, it would have just been like really, really sad and probably really difficult to watch. Like incredibly difficult to watch because basically she was an abused woman throughout her childhood, and then when she got married she was also an abused woman. So I wanted to talk about that aspect of the film. Recreating your childhood home. Everybody does this. Everybody recreates their childhood home in any subsequent relationship that they have, whether it's like with a partner, or whether it's in the workplace, or whether it's with friends. But especially with a partner, you recreate your childhood home. And depending on how that was for you, that's what you're going to see coming up again. And I think a lot of times when people come from like really shitty childhoods, they're unaware of it. Like obviously they don't know any better. How would you? You only know what you know. And the unique situation that you're in when you're a child is that you're helpless and you rely 100% on your caretaker to help you to survive. It's not just a question of, when if you're an adult, when you're in an adult relationship and maybe like you need somebody for financial assistance, or you need somebody because you have severe anxiety and you need someone to always be able to talk to, someone who's always there to talk to, or whatever, like whatever your needs are as an adult, they're different, but you're not actually helpless. Whereas when you're a child, you literally rely on your caretakers to survive. And especially the first few years of life, 0 to 5, you would literally die without them. And so the human brain is programmed in that way to love and respond positively to your primary caretaker, because the human brain knows that that's how I survive. I survive by forming an attachment. And so in this film, it highlights to us attachment trauma. It highlights to us trauma bonding and recreating one's childhood home. So for Tonya in the film, she grew up with a very overbearing mother, a very controlling mother. The woman was, I'm not a shrink or anything, but clearly a narcissist, and maybe she had some kind of personality disorder too. Who's to say? But that's the environment that she grew up in. And so her mother, yes, she did make her into a champion. However, it wasn't through emotional support. It was just through like pressure, like you're gonna fucking do this, or it's the belt or whatever, you know what I mean? Like, so yes, she was a champion, sure, she was excellent, she was fantastic, she was better than anyone else. She had mad skills. However, she had zero emotional support, and with zero emotional support, like you really can only go so far. Emotional support, there's an Ellie Goulding song where she says, in the song she describes about how standing with, I guess it's her husband now, with that person is like standing with an army, and that's what emotional support is. It like uplifts you when you can't lift yourself up, and or it just it sustains you when you're doing well. So it's not only it's not only something that helps you when you're down, but it's also something that sustains you when you're doing really well. And with a lack of emotional support, you can become a champion, but guess what? It's just not possible for that to be sustainable, because you always have this negativity trying to drag you down. And so by the end of the film, and if you haven't seen the film, maybe stop watching this video. By the end of the film, you know, after all is said and done and the incident's taken place, and you're never sure about who's done it or who's responsible, but the consequence for her is that ice skating is taken away from her completely. And she even says, fucking give me jail time, I'll do the fucking jail time, just don't take the skating away from me. Like, I don't fucking give a shit if I have to go and do jail time, I'll do it, just don't take the skating away from me. But that was the consequence of a lack of emotional support, ultimately, was that she was surrounded by toxicity, whether she was aware of it or not entirely. And that's what toxicity does. It just fucking drowns you, and it drags you back down to the same level as the people who were toxic. And so ice skating was taken away from her. So I wanted to talk about emotional support and attachment trauma. Now, attachment trauma is a very, very interesting topic. It relates back to before you could even speak, pre-verbal you, when you relied 100% on your caretaker to provide everything for you in order for you to survive. If they didn't provide these things for you, you would not survive. You would have died as a baby or an infant. So your brain sort of wires itself to form an attachment with this person, and that attachment is love, that attachment is loyalty, that attachment is just knowing that, like, this person is your person and this person is here for you. And unfortunately, in the case of like childhood abuse, like with Tonya, your brain is going to wire itself to attach itself to someone who is callous and cruel and provides you with the bare minimum. I mean, obviously, she was she would have been fed as an infant, and the bare minimum would have been provided, but there was no like emotional nurturing or any sort of emotional exchange. There was no like fairness. Communication wasn't two-way, it was just one way, either being barked at or being yelled at or being hit. And many times in the film you see, like, when she says anything to her mother or to her husband, they just react by hitting her. So that's something that her brain would have been wired to interpret that as love, because when she was when you're a baby, when your brain is just developing, her caretaker was not a good one. Her caretaker was quite violent and cruel. So those sort of behaviors are wired in her brain to be interpreted as love. And so you can see how someone would get into a relationship with someone like that. And also, in the beginning, people who are abusive, they know how to turn on the charm, and they know that what they're doing is abusive. Like, they don't need you to fucking explain it to them, which you see a lot in the film. Like, she'll think she's sticking up for herself by like hitting him back, or telling him not to do a certain thing or call her a certain thing or whatever. And I mean, she thinks she's sticking up for herself, like she would probably say, oh, I would never put up with that. In her mind, she thinks that she would never put up with that, and yet in reality, yes, she is. That is her life. She does put up with that. She has a high tolerance for bullshit, and she does put up with it. And then even when she does want to leave, and she gets her own place and whatever, like, he comes at her with a fucking gun. And so you can see where the attachment trauma is on his side. Perhaps, he 100% grew up in a violent home, and maybe in his home, in addition to the violence, he would have been like abandoned or deserted. So people like that grow into adults who fear abandonment and desertion, you know, at all costs. So for her to like abandon him, I mean, she was leaving him for good reason, but in his mind, he'd been abandoned. He had to come back at her by any means possible, and in this case, it was with a fucking gun. And you know, he's waving the gun about in the fucking air, and he winds up shooting her, and then he threatens to shoot himself, and then like even the police don't even fucking get involved. Like it's insane, but it's a reality. It's an insane reality. And so, and then she also knows in her mind that, you know, if I protest any, I mean, she would have realized as well, like, okay, this is the line where, you know, I can protest up until a certain point, but then after that, like, it's going to get even worse. It's worse than being hit. It's, you know, I'm going to get fucking shot and murdered. You know what I mean? So, like, it's a double bind. There's no way out of it. If you try and leave, this person's going to come at you and not let you leave. It's like that Eminem song where he goes, if she tries to leave again, I'm tired to the bed and set this motherfucking house on fire or whatever. And it's the same thing, you know? So you can see where the attachment trauma works both ways, and that's a really fucked up situation to be in. It's very difficult to get out of it. And so the other thing that I wanted to discuss as well was trauma bonding. So trauma bonding takes place when, like, you can see in the beginning of the film where, you know, where they're getting to know each other for 2 weeks, and then they both decide after 2 weeks that that's a sufficient amount of time, and that's, you know, that's all you need. So with trauma bonding, basically, two people have the exact same type of trauma, and so they just form a bond immediately. There's no real getting to know the person. Like, there's no in-depth understanding of the person. You just sort of have a superficial understanding of the person because you can tell that they're like you. They're very similar to you. So you bond over that and then just decide to be together. And then there's no, like, you know, checking in, like, after a month, like, oh, hey, you know what? Am I still, like, fucking happy? No, I'm not, because I've got a fucking shiner. So I just paused there because I was going to tell a really bad joke. You know what? I think I'll tell it anyway. So what do you say to a woman that's got 2 black eyes? Nothing. You already told her twice. You know what I mean? So, like, that's exactly how it is in those situations. It's horrible and it's insane and it's fucked up, but both parties are involved. Both parties are participants in this situation. And I wouldn't say like they're willing participants, but I would say that they, you know, the person who is the violent one knows what they're doing. Like, they know that they're managing their partner through intimidation or through violence. So, I mean, you might not, it might not be that the person is like physically violent, but they could be emotionally violent or psychologically violent. So they would like gaslight their partner and try and make them think that everything that they do is wrong, and try and like make them think that it's their fault that they have all these problems, you know what I mean? And they would never take any responsibility for their actions or even admit to having any sort of, not even a little bit of a role in the dysfunction. And the primary goal of these tactics is just to remain in this trauma bond. Like, they want to stay in this trauma bond because they're fucking happy with the way things are. That's what they interpret as love, and that's what they want. They don't want to be in a stable relationship, like a mutually respectful and understanding relationship. It's not what they want. They want the dysfunction because that's what they know. That's what they interpret as love. So it was just really interesting to watch the film, although the violence, even though it was done comedically, it was still like a bit too fucking much. Like, it was kind of hard to watch at times. It was just so fucking constant. And really all I came away from with the film was just feeling sorry for this woman, because this wasn't her fault. Like, none of this was her fault, you know? How are you going to blame a fucking victim? You know what I mean? And I feel like people do blame victims all the time. And I mean, it is what it is. You need to have like empathy and compassion for people who are not like you, or for people in situations that are different to situations that you've been in, because like the more apart and different and other we are, the less likely it is for them to heal. And we all need to heal together at the same time. Like, the world that we live in is a reflection of our collective emotional evolution. So it's not all right to say, oh, hey, you know, I'm not dysfunctional and I'm all good and my relationships are all fine, you know, the hell with other people. It isn't all right to say that, because the world that we live in is a reflection of just the average of all the people that are on it. So I like making these videos because, you know, I hope that it touches someone out there and that it's helpful to someone out there. And I really like to watch films like that because they're illuminating. They help you to understand things that you maybe think that you understood, but you didn't really understand. And everyone needs to evaluate their childhood, whether you think it was fucking amazing or not. Everyone has some degree of attachment trauma. Like, it doesn't need to be extreme like that. It doesn't need to involve violence or extreme neglect, but to one extent or another, everybody has some sort of attachment trauma. You know, it could be that both of your parents were constantly working, so you just didn't get enough attention. Like, you did get attention when they were able to, but for your infant self, it just wasn't sufficient. So that's going to manifest in the shape of attachment trauma. You're going to find yourself in relationships where you don't get enough attention, or you'll find yourself in a relationship where people were constantly in relationships where people refer to you as needy, and it's like, well, no, you're not needy. Those are what your needs are, but you're bonding with people who have the same trauma as you, and they do not want to give you that attention, or they're unable to. And, you know, unless you look back and really evaluate your childhood and your patterns in relationships and look for the parallels, you're going to keep finding yourself in the same situation. I feel like this video has not really gone very in-depth into the different topics, because I think I brought up like 3 or 4 different topics here. So let me know in the comments if there's something that you want me to talk about more in depth, or if you just want me to go over some of these things again. And that's it, yeah. Adios.